How's today been for you guys? Yeah? Okay. Well, let's keep the energy going. My name is Ren Martin. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a representative of North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. I serve on the National Steering Committee that will be spearheading the Interfaith Power and Light affiliate network. And I am honored to be here with all of you as the moderator for this panel, Truth in the Storm, Effective Strategies for Climate Disaster and Communication. With us here, we have our four lovely panelists. I will let them introduce themselves in just a moment, but it wouldn't truly be a truth communication session without acknowledging those of us who are not in the room. And so I wanted to take the time to honor a panelist that was not able to be here, Stephanie from NOAA, who had to step out at the last moment due to travel restrictions. So may she be here with us in spirit. Now I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves and just take the time to share how your organization may impact and engage in climate disaster communication. And one last note, I would like this to be more of a discussion between the panelists. So throughout today, we've seen a lot of folks just speaking maybe one at a time. I'd love for the panelists here to build off of each other and to really engage with one another. And we will have questions at the end of this panel. So look forward to that. I'll pass it to you all.
Should we stand up there?
You can sit, stand, whatever you'd like.
Take the podium.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Jones with StormCenter Communications. You may have seen me ask a question or two at the meeting here. It's such a great pleasure to be here. It's a different kind of meeting for me. I usually go to a lot of data meetings and science meetings talking about data applications. But I really appreciate Dwayne. Is Dwayne in here? I don't know if Dwayne is still here. Introducing me to Heather and also Dr. Ellen Prager to Heather, and then the invitation to come and speak. So I really appreciate it, and it's a pleasure to be here. So trusted information that can be understood leads to more informed decisions. But we have misinformation out there, or even worse, disinformation. There's been a significant amount of investment made in researching where misinformation comes from, how it gets spread and consumed, but very little investment has been made in actually combating misinformation, telling the science stories that build trust. So the science agencies and other funders are great at reaching the choir and speaking to those within our communities, but reaching outside our science communities has been very limited because it's not easy. And so people in communities need information. We all know that. We've been talking about that. Without information, nobody knows what they don't know. And at StormCenter Communications, we have spent decades listening, learning, and leading to bring an all-hazards approach that combines data access, visualization, collaboration, and communication. One common theme we've been hearing time and time again for more than 15 years when we go to meetings and talk with people in person and online is they say, we need to figure out how to share data and bring people together. We've been hearing that for a long time. We need to collaborate together. We need to reduce our siloed approach. So we accepted that challenge and we went to work. We developed and patented a web-based, cloud-based, platform-independent, real-time data sharing and collaboration environment to bring people together in a collaborative common operating picture, which I call CCOP, to improve situational awareness and decision-making. We wanted to take the burden away from having non-technical decision makers forced to find relevant data. We spent time and effort working to identify trusted data sources and how those data can be accessed and used by communities that want data and information. We partnered with a group called the All Hazards Consortium. It's a nonprofit organization with 45,000 stakeholders from government, whether it's federal and state emergency management organizations, the food, fuel, communications, transportation, logistics, medical supply, pharmaceutical supply sectors to launch the GeoCollaborate dashboard and extreme event impact-based video updates. That improved trusted information delivery and helped keep the economy moving when disasters hit. So we're looking to partner with communities, organizations, and even vulnerable territories and nations to improve data collection, display, and use. We're working to relaunch our extreme weather and community resilience summits that we started many years ago that brings broadcast meteorologists together with scientists. Because broadcast meteorologists aren't trained to talk about climate change, climate impacts. They're not trained to talk about tsunamis, earthquakes, and other types of hazards. So we bring them together for a week of information sharing and live broadcasts back to their markets. Our last summit before COVID, we had 2 million viewers online. That was in 2019. And we broadcast to more than 100 million homes from that meeting. The need is there and people want trusted information. So here's a great story. For the last 2 years, we've been providing video updates through our YouTube channel platform to the All Hazards Consortium and their stakeholders. The videos are run from 5 to 30 minutes in length for stakeholders of the All Hazards, and we had about 520 subscribers to that YouTube channel so they could access it and see what kind of impacts to transportation they would have, how is it going to impact the pharmaceutical supply company. Here's a quick little fact. This is the company, the biggest one in the world, that delivers prescription drugs, medications to CVS, Walgreens, all the pharmacies. And if they have a wildfire anywhere near their warehouse and smoke gets in to the warehouse, then the receiving party, whether it's a CVS or Walgreens or whatever, can turn down that shipment if it smells like smoke. And we're talking billions of dollars worth of inventory. So they want to know where wildfire smoke is, among other things. So this past hurricane season, we opened up the videos to the public to see what kind of response we would get. We weren't really expecting a big response. We opened it up prior to Hurricane Helene. Views exploded, and so did the comments. We went from 520 subscribers to 17,500 subscribers in 4 days. The subscriptions grew by 3,365%. People wanted trusted information. The comments came in by the thousands that they loved the science. They loved why we needed satellites. They loved learning why we need ocean observing systems. They had no idea. And they had no idea what computer modeling really means because all they hear on television is the American versus the Euro model, right? We've all heard that before. They want to learn, and there's a hunger out there. So we feel confident that we can now design local approaches that combine live and near real-time data with video updates so people can listen to local briefings on any type of hazard that's important to a specific region while also accessing the data in the dashboard. They can manipulate and work with the data to turn it on and off while they're watching the video update. If Caribbean islands want to connect and share information on an approaching storm or access and display trusted data on an approaching storm, they can. Local implementation of GeoCollaborate can connect communities with data that addresses their priorities, and we can build upon that initial data. Think about this. And add more, such as air quality. Where are the public lands? Water quality test results, and perhaps even soil quality test results. A local project we're kicking off with students will take pictures, they'll go around the neighborhood, take pictures of the storm drains, geolocate them, and put them in so we can show where all of the storm drains are in a particular neighborhood. So then when heavy rain gets forecast, we can remind people to go out and clean the drain in front of their house. Our approach to effective strategies for climate and disaster communication starts with 15 years of listening, learning, and now leading. Dr. Ellen Prager, a marine scientist, aquanaut, author, and StormCenter's chief scientist, but more importantly, my fiance, was also invited here to speak. But we have an aging dog at home, and she thought it was best that she stay there because we'll be going to Florida next week to give some talks. And Columbia University Press recently published our book. Ellen's name is first. Called Megalodons, Mermaids, and Climate Change, Answers to Your Ocean and Atmosphere Questions. And the first printing is already sold out. It was printed in October and published. Thank you. And we're really grateful to the Sloan Foundation and NASA Heliophysics. NASA gave us some funds to write a chapter on the sun. So there's a chapter in there on the sun. Even though the cover looks like it might be a kid's book, it's not really a kid's book. The age range is 12 to 120. So we've gotten great feedback from lots of folks. And really, the book answers common and sometimes wacky questions about oceans, atmosphere, and the sun. So on many fronts, we're doing our best to listen, learn, and lead. I look forward to any questions about what we're doing and from all the great panelists up here. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for sharing. So we've already touched on several of the questions that we'll be asking in a moment about, misinformation, disinformation, collaboration, and what it is that we need to do to create trustworthy communications during disasters. And so I would encourage our other panelists, we want to make sure that everybody receives equal time. If we could have a quick introduction now of your organization and yourself, and then really deep dive into these main discussions, that would be wonderful. You can, let's say, if everybody could take the podium for introducing yourself, and then let's all just sit down for the majority of the discussion.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Chip Kasper. I'm a meteorologist in charge for the National Weather Service Weather Forecast Office in Key West, Florida. And I'm also the current team lead of the NOAA Southeast and Caribbean Regional Collaboration Team, CCART. And I'm very happy to be here. It's already been a very interesting day and a half. Happy to be with you now and appreciate your time. When it comes to the truth in the storm, I really just keep going back to risk communication. That's kind of what it's all about. And one of my favorite definitions of risk communication is the interactive process of exchanging information and opinions among individuals, groups, and institutions concerning a risk or potential risk to human health or the environment. That's a lot. Sounds kind of messy too, doesn't it? And it is. But it's obvious that no successful risk communication endeavor happens alone. It requires everybody. And in a sense, they're all local. But I'm here to speak really on behalf of the National Weather Service, because that's kind of my world. I've I've been in the National Weather Service for almost 3 decades, most of it in the Florida Keys, a very vulnerable population that happens to get hit quite often by tropical cyclones. So if you look at the Weather Service side, we've kind of been involved in some sort of risk communication going back to the beginning of the agency in 1870, when it was called the Weather Bureau under the Signal Corps. And back in those days, before computers and TV and internet and social media, they used flags, lights, horseback, planes eventually radio communications. And obviously that has evolved with technology, as it still is doing today. But nowadays we have a lot more tools. And again, like I said before, this involves everybody. So, in the Weather Service, when we have any kind of impact from a hurricane or tornado or, ocean storm, wildfires, et cetera, we have something called the Integrated Warning System, right? And that's really a team that involves the government, the Weather Service side, the NOAA side, emergency management, first responders, and the media. And really, this is a collaborative effort, not only during an event or right before an event, but also, any time of year. We have integrated warning teams that convene regularly, and now they start at the local level. There's 122 forecast offices. So if you live in any of the United States or any of its territories, you're served by one of them. And so the warning coordination meteorologist at these forecast offices will kind of take the lead in convening these integrated warning teams, and they discuss things we're discussing today on how to communicate risk and hazards to populations at risk. And so we also have the Storm Ready program, which allows communities at all scales to work with the Weather Service and their emergency management representatives to be ready for storms. And there's different designations under that, but the whole idea is to work together to prepare and to achieve that preparedness mindset, which somebody, I think Maggie, talked about earlier. The emergency alert system. This is a system that's kind of put together by NOAA and the FCC and FEMA, and it allows you to get wireless alerts on your phone, and for severe weather, child kidnappings, and other events. This isn't easy. It's kind of messy, but really what it involves is, and I've heard this many times already yesterday and today, participation and effort. I think Mr. Saxon said with the speech from Teddy Roosevelt. That's really important, and I see a lot of that in this room, but we all know that it's not everywhere. And so part of our challenge is to find that energy and that participation and that effort where we can and work together. So anyway, I look forward to the rest of the discussion and to meeting more of you before we end this meeting later today. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ian Weaver. I am an associate professor at the University of North Carolina here in Wilmington. And my training is in technical communication, and I'm housed in the English department. And what that means is I've had a confluence of training in the social sciences and humanities. So I'm trying to think if I could answer the question, how would my department or where we sit at the university, how would we contribute to this? My first thoughts went to that we look at communication as more than just a message. We think of communication as something that's baked into the organizations and institutions that we're a part of. And that is those with whom we work, but also those that trained us and educated us. The relationship that we create between information, what we expect information to do and how we expect it to perform, says a lot about how we I guess, appreciate and work with our users, our audience, our listeners, whoever it is that we're working with. And so, in my field, we look at communication as a sort of triangle, and think about, we could study the message as one on one point. We can study the person on another point. We can study the institution or person communicating at another point. So a lot of my research looks at the relationship between expert and public audience, and how people can craft their messages, but also interact with people, with users and audiences, to create better information and assess risk together. So yeah, I could go on a lot more. It'll probably get lecture-y at this point. So, but that's me for now. I'll go ahead and pass it on for now.
So I'm going to stick to the prompt of introduction so we can get moving. My name's Ashton Merck. I am the program manager for climate research and engagement at the Museum of Life and Science in Durham, North Carolina. A short 2+ hour drive from here, if anybody is interested in going to the best science center in North Carolina. That's right. Science centers play, and I also, a key part of my role is that I am the program manager for the Center for Collaborative Heat Monitoring, which is a new national partnership led by science centers and supported by technical experts to conduct community science around extreme heat. This was funded by NIHIS, the National Integrated Heat Health Information System, last year as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And my whole job is to make sure that that happens to the best of my ability. I will just talk briefly about science centers. They are really essential piece in this discussion about communication around climate. Science centers are, the way that they approach communication is through the lens of informal education. So it's not you sitting in a classroom, you sitting in a big ballroom, listening to people talk. It's about experiences, it's about inquiry, questions, participation in something that you are currently experiencing. So that's, you're looking at animals that you would not normally see. You are out in nature. You're in the butterfly house. You are reading about an exhibit, reading exhibit copy on the rights of nature. All of these things that science centers do as trusted partners in the community. Science centers are not necessarily viewed quite as partisan as maybe a university or some other organization. And the science centers can also be a bridge between these community-based organizations that we work directly with as partners and universities and other research institutions. I'm happy to talk more, but that's sort of a general summary. Thanks.
Thank you all again for being here today. To start off our discussion, and again, I would love for this to be a discussion and to think about what we are saying to each other, especially as people who are coming from very diverse backgrounds within the communication sector. It's important that we talk amongst ourselves and really build those bridges, as Ashton said. And so I wanted to ask you all, what are the most important elements of building trust in communities? And conversely, what tools or strategies have been most effective in actually curbing misinformation within those communities? And I'd like to work backwards a little bit. So Ashton, if you could take us off.
I kind of maybe jumped ahead in my talking about that, the role of science centers. I think, at least from my perspective in this new role, is that relationships are the most important parts of building trust. It's one thing to ask the Latinx community to come to your museum so that more of your community members can learn about important concepts in STEM. It's another thing entirely to work directly with a community-based organization that already serves those populations and have them be the advocate that the Museum of Life and Science is a great place to take your kids. And I think that's just one of many possible examples. And then it works the other way as well when you're thinking about how museums and science centers relate to research enterprises. It's one thing for a researcher from Duke to show up in a community and say, we have all these research questions and we have all this funding. It's very different for a science center to approach a community with whom they may already have a relationship and say, hey, we got some funding and we want to hear what your questions are. So the way that we actually approach research from a science center perspective changes the types of questions we want to ask and the questions that we end up asking. And in many cases, I came from academia. I spent 10 years in academia. In many cases, it allows us to ask questions that have a higher chance of greater impact.
Yeah, I would build on that with the idea of a relationship. And for me, it is in two ways. One is in the classroom. I didn't mention before, but I teach science writing and different information design classes. And so we're always talking about who holds the knowledge in these types of, in a science writing class, we talk about where does the knowledge come from, how is it constructed, and we try to engage with communities as much as we can. So I think as we're training and teaching people, younger generations, we need to help them see that shift that a lot of people are recognizing, that knowledge is distributed and is often created through the interaction between people. And that includes things like risk. The second thing that comes to my mind is how we choose, okay, I'm really trying hard not to revert into lecture, but we teach a lot about rhetoric, and one of the concepts of rhetoric is our credibility and the trust that we can create. And oftentimes we talk about trust and credibility can be something that's sort of imposed upon a speaker or a group. Also, it's something that can be constructed. So our trust and credibility is constructed in the messages that we create, but it's also constructed through how we choose to interact with people. If it's just through messaging, if through information transfer, that's very different than it is through the different listening activities and methodologies that people have been talking about. It's been fantastic being here, by the way. So those are my two thoughts.
So you're going to hear some of the same words here, but when it comes to establishing, building, and maintaining trust, I think of two things. One, relationships, and the other, credibility. And, in NOAA and the National Weather Service, we often talk about, service and science. And so, the credibility part, I think, has to do with our scientific approach to the mission and our work. And, NOAA is world-class in terms of scientists, but it's our responsibility and the responsibility of the people leading the agency as well to make sure that that's done with integrity, and I think we do a pretty good job of that in NOAA. The other part is the relationships, and at a local forecast office in NOAA, we have an advantage because we're there. We're members of the community we serve, and but of course, there's not just one community in a forecast area. There's many different communities. Some of them obviously more vulnerable than others, and so in those cases, we have to find ways to connect, to listen, and to respond, and to work together with all elements of our constituents. So there's certain roles in the community that can help you do that. I've talked about emergency managers, elected officials and their staffs. I think faith-based communities and leaders are very important, and that was alluded to maybe yesterday a few times. And then obviously your array of different civic groups, neighborhood associations. This is all important when, not just important, but essential when we're establishing trust.
When we meet with, whether it's scientists or communities, we try to meet people where they're at, right? It was beautifully said yesterday in the session, don't bring science to communities that don't know a lot about science. Talk to us about impacts of what a changing climate and how that changing climate is energizing weather systems and how that is going to impact us. So when you meet people, it's a funny story. One of them is actually in the book. We were in Maine, sitting in a bar to get just a little hot chocolate, and there were two guys sitting at the other end of the bar, and they must have heard us talking about climate change and weather, and he leaned over and he said, "Is that climate change thing real?" And we ordered a second margarita, and then we said, "Well, what do you guys do? What do you do here?" And they're lobstermen. And I said, "Well, are you noticing anything? Anything changed over the last 5 years, 10 years?" "Oh yeah, I just had to buy a whole bunch of new traps because we had this storm that came up, or we're having to go a little bit deeper, or this or that." So we started talking to them about that and about the impacts that they're having. We said, well, that all kind of relates to what's going on in the atmosphere, and it's impacting you in various ways. And they're like, "Yeah, well, that's weather. It happens." I said, "Yeah, but climate change is actually loading the dice that we're going to have more of those events as time goes on." And so by the end of the night, when we got up and left, they came over and shook our hands and said, "Thanks a lot. We kind of think now that climate change is real." And hey, it's... You don't have to preach to people to tell them what you know about science and all that stuff. You just talk to them about what are they seeing and what are they experiencing. And that, I think, builds tremendous trust because we didn't even know these guys at the beginning, and at the end they're shaking our hands. So.
I really love that, especially as a note to end on for that part of the question. Thinking about meeting people where they're at and really understanding that we're not trying to preach to people, right? Like, yes, we want to be in relationship with preachers, but that's not necessarily our jobs as climate communicators to do the preaching. And so I really want to dig in on some of the strategies and the most effective things that you all have seen to improve disaster and climate communication, whether that be during a disaster or responding to misinformation. Is there anything that comes to your mind when thinking about the key things to keep in mind? And anybody, feel free to start.
I think with us, one of the successes that we've seen is that when we focus on the science and talk about what's happening in the atmosphere, particularly I'm thinking about the YouTube channel and the responses that we've gotten, are that people just don't want to know what's going to happen. They want to know how we know it's going to happen. And the way in which we tell that story is the reason that we know that this storm that's in the Gulf of Alaska right now is going to be impacting the United States is because we can see it on satellites. Oh, well, what's a satellite? Well, we have different types of satellites. This geostationary one just keeps watching over the western part, the GOES West satellite, and we can watch it move. Look, see it moving? And look, we can show you the jet stream. This is from a numerical model. This is the jet stream. Look, it's going to dip down, and this is the conveyor belt of air that's going to be taking this low pressure system down into the Pacific Northwest, and then it's going to go off here. So when you integrate a little bit of knowledge into, you know, a forecast or impacts that they're gonna feel or they're gonna see, they feel more empowered, right? Knowledge is power. And when they know that, they want to know more. And so that's our approach, is sort of taking the technology and not making that the focus, but making it an ability for them to access data and learn more, combined with a video explanation of what's going to be going on. So that seems to be pretty effective. And the last thing I'll just mention is the weather and climate summits that we put together for broadcast meteorologists have been spectacular. I mean, you know, in 2019, when we broadcast live, we had it, I think that last one was in Breckenridge, Colorado. We had people asking a lot of questions online live. And we had people saying, thank you for having this. The government of Canada, their climate change and what is it? What's the name of it? It's Climate Change Canada, or what's Environment? Yeah, it's Environment Canada. They changed it to Environment and Climate Change Canada. That's the name of their service. They put up the weather and climate every day, live streaming in all of their offices across all of Canada, and told their employees, if you get a chance, pop in and watch some of these sessions. So when you can appeal and reach, you know, the mass markets with science information, you don't overwhelm them. I think it really does empower them.
So it sounds like demonstrating things, right? Like actually having people visually see what is there and communicating in that way has been very powerful. Does anybody else feel called to discuss? Yeah.
Yeah, two things come to mind. And I think anytime you're trying to communicate the potential impacts of an extreme event, that's very challenging. It's been alluded to already today. But I think testimonials, in other words, it's, you know, somebody who's been through a hurricane or been through a flood, and just being able to see or hear that person talk about it, and you could see the body language and, you know, and the stress and just the descriptive nature of it. I think testimonials probably have a great potential for communicating, you know, the reality of a disaster, and we probably don't use them enough. And the other thing would be like just being able to see the scenario, like a virtual reality. I've seen some of this online now, and, you know, and even with NOAA's sea level rise projection maps, I mean, that's one way, but actually to have something where you could actually maybe envision, you know, your home going underwater, or what happens when you have 160 mile an hour sustained wind to things, you know, in nature. And so I think those two things are probably underutilized.
I want to ask a specific question. I'm so sorry to skip you, Ian, but what you said actually made me think of Max from the Science Center. I know that he had worked on like gamification almost of.
I was going to talk about that.
Yeah, so I wanted to pick on you, and then Ian, if we could end on you for that.
Yeah, so as well, also on the point about testimonials, one of the things that the museum has been doing, I was not part of this, so I'm kind of speaking out of turn a little bit, is some oral history work, both with Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians as well as some work down east. And I think some of that oral history work is really centered on getting people to move from, oh, it's always hot here, oh, it always floods here, to like understanding that those conditions that they have normalized may be part of this broader new normal of climate and change and disaster. And so I think from what I've seen of the oral history work, it can be an incredibly powerful tool to both serve as like community documentation and storytelling and narrative, as well as this kind of awareness, education, and communication. And then the gamification, I'm sorry, Rebecca, this is like the second time today you've gotten called out, but everybody go find Rebecca's poster, which talks about, yeah, Go find Rebecca's poster, talk to her about this game, Futurescape. It is available, open access. Theoretically, you could download it and print it and do it yourself. I recently facilitated it here last week for the first time at Coastal GeoTools, like 10 feet that way. It was very hard to facilitate the first time, but it was fine. I was fine. And the gamification aspect of this, I think, is really also an underexplored area for helping people visualize and think through some of the very real challenges in a otherwise kind of fabricated setting. So, Ian.
Yeah, so my mind went to something similar, but so I think we need to get outside of the language that we use to describe our science and risk that we're trained in. This has been mentioned, but it so structures our thinking that sometimes we forget what it's like to be someone who doesn't think of weather as lines or maps and so I often visualize this. I have this picture, sometimes I'll show it, of my daughter when she was, 4 years old. We were living in Lubbock, Texas, and we got 6 inches of snow, which was insane. And she was standing in the snow with gloves that were too big because we never get snow. So she was wearing her mom's gloves and these all mismatched clothes, and she was crying her head off, right? And it just is this perfect example of a little girl freezing cold in the snow, ready to go inside. That's weather to a lot of people, right? And in a lot of ways, and versus how we think about it. And one practical example of this, I think, was like the 2011 Joplin tornadoes. When the meteorologists at the National Weather Service issued a tornado emergency, which I don't think that language at the time was part of the original language, but they were like, we needed people to understand that this is a big deal. It's more than a tornado warning, it's a tornado emergency. Breaking outside of that language really did communicate and help a lot of people. So.
I feel like it's worth shouting out. One of the National Weather Service offices in Texas has the like taco warning. That is like in our office. That's always how we sort of distinguish.
Is that like the
what's
Waffle
happening.
House Index or
Waffle House Index? No, the taco watch and taco warning is taco watch is we have the stuff to make tacos. Taco warning, we're eating tacos right now. Sometimes there are real taco warnings in the office in the sense that we're eating tacos, but that's different. But these kinds of things seem really silly, but they're actually really effective, and I think that should be a good takeaway from this too.
And just for clarification, the Waffle House Index, for those who haven't heard of it, is Waffle House is always open. So if your Waffle House is closed, stuff's about to go down. And then we have about 15 minutes left in the session. I want to be mindful to make sure that we can ask questions, but I wanted to take about 5 minutes or so just to be able to ask this last question to you all. There's been a lot of doom and gloom and stress and depression that we experience here in the climate and disaster relief sector. And so when thinking about communicating to the masses or even internally communicating with each other, I wanted to ask you all, what brings you hope? So if each of you could just, offer one thought on the matter, that would be wonderful. And I want to pick on Ian and Ashton first. You can rock, paper, scissors just for who goes first. I know, Ian, that you work with younger people, so I'd love to hear about that too.
I've been thinking about this all morning because I knew this was coming. I'm a historian by training, and I know that there are lots of ways that you can look to the past and find really unsettling and even more doom and gloom kind of resonances with our current moment. But if you look further into the past, there was a time when the scope and scale of our federal government as we know it today did not exist, and bad things happened. Steamships exploded in the Mississippi in the 1840s. Cholera hit New York City because municipal water wasn't treated. Fires, floods, all of these things have been going on. And first at the state and local level, changes were made. These programs were set up, and then it eventually spread to the federal level, and we built the administrative state that we know today, beginning in the 1930s. What year was NOAA created? Does anybody know? Right. NOAA is one of those agencies that sort of has existed since 1807, I think. But NOAA, as we know it today, was created in 1970 during the Nixon administration, if you can believe that. And we did this once before, and we can do it again. And that's kind of what gives me hope right now. So if we have to do it all over again, we've at least got a blueprint for how it was done in the past.
Yeah, we do a little bit of ACT therapy, and not really, but we do talk about sometimes when we're getting doom and gloom in the classroom, the acceptance of things that are uncomfortable, and how that has been part of our history, and that's something we can learn to live with. But we also talk a lot about, and we try to bring in projects from around the community here in Wilmington and the different rural communities that are around, and try and get the students focused on local and where they can actually work. A lot of the doom and gloom seems to come from a big picture where we're looking at, look what's happening over there, and it becomes oppressive over time. And so if we can focus on the parts that we can move forward on and the local aspects, the students get energized and they feel like they're making a difference, which I hope they take with them as they move to the next step.
I find hope in a lot of different places, actually. First and foremost, I find hope in my colleagues in the Weather Service and in NOAA, and their dedication and effort and participation and energy and just, focus on the mission. I mean, that's without question. So I find hope, with our partners and the people in the community, and the Coast Guard captain that comes up and says, your marine forecast last week saved 12 people, saved the lives of 12 people, or emergency manager says, if you guys didn't do what you did, we couldn't do what we do, I find hope with the people in this room and the fact that we're all here talking about this and trying to get better and trying to move forward. And then also the kids, we talk a lot with school groups and field trips and things like that. And especially, I don't know what it is, but that 4th to 7th grade, kind of that age group is just tremendous. And I think that's an untapped source of sort of the preparedness mindset, to borrow a term again, because I think if you learn it at that age, it kind of sticks. And also, I've found that children can educate the parents. And so anyway, those are some sources of hope for me.
I've often said this to people, particularly over the last, year or 2 years, that sometimes it feels like a curse to know so much about the climate and extreme weather, because you don't want to be the one that shows up all the time briefing people and it's always about a high impact event, right? You're gonna be like, oh no, here he comes again, right? Just like Jim Cantori. I don't want to see him on my beach, right? But the nice thing is that when we talk about extreme events, we also talk about when it passes and it moves through. Weather is going to be high impact weather occasionally. And then we talk about the good weather, that's going to be here, that's going to help people recover, that's going to help people respond. And I wrote something down here during one of the sessions this morning, because we all work very hard to keep communities safe and to inform people about what may be coming, what impacts might happen. And I was thinking about everybody in this room and the jobs that you do every day. And how many of you, just by a quick little show of hands, have thought about once a week that what I'm doing isn't really that important? Does anybody in the room feel that way sometimes? I do. What I'm doing, sometimes it just doesn't feel important. Well, guess what? It might not be important when you're thinking that at the moment, until it is. and we talk about catastrophes or disasters or high impact events, prepare, right? We just heard that in the last session. Prepare for what may happen so you can be ready. So, I jotted down here, go forward knowing that your work is critical, and soon you will have your day. The world will know it, and in tough times, you never took your eyes off the ball. So if you continue to do what you're doing, everything that you're doing in this room, everybody is critical. And your time is going to come when everybody's going to be so glad that you continued to do your job. So, thank you.
Thank you all so much. And I actually think that we could use a little bit more audience participation. So before we get to questions, I wanted to make sure to ask you guys some questions of your own. I'm going to use your example. So we're going to do a very, very quick raise your hand if scenario. So raise your hand if you're stressed out right now about everything in the news. I know I am. Okay, that's a lot of us. Raise your hand if you feel like your organization could be doing a better job at communicating everything that's happening to the public. Okay, yeah, still a lot of us. Raise your hand if you think that you personally could maybe do better at communicating your work and what's happening. Yeah. Okay, I'm glad that we're having this conference then. And then 2 more. Raise your hand if you think that acronyms are annoying, because I think that there's so many in the environmental space. There's too many, if you will. That goes back to the curse, if you will. Like when you start noticing yourself using the acronyms, that's when you know you're caught up in it. And then lastly, I wanted to ask you all, please raise your hand if you can think of something that gives you hope during this time of crisis. I'm so glad to see that we have just as many hands up as we did with the previous questions. So hold on to that hope, and may we work together to create a better world. Does anybody have any questions for our panelists? I see a question in the back.
Hello, thank you so much for that panel. I want to make a plug and then relate it to a question I'm curious for the speakers to answer. So one, we've heard a little bit about in this conference how sort of culturally sensitive or culturally intelligent approaches are important for communicating about risk and community engagement and planning and so forth. I'll just point to a publication that I enjoy reading called Atmos.Earth. It's all about connecting climate and culture. Gives me a lot of hope reading stories. It's international, very diverse set of authors, but I'm curious, other examples, maybe from the panelists, of where you've seen a program or project or messaging that is culturally sensitive to a particular community, or ways you've seen that done well to make sure that, it's not just sort of like standard, maybe like FEMA language that's going to somebody who, maybe an immigrant in the community and is not familiar with all of this jargon. So I'm just curious, any examples of where you've seen that done well in your work? Thanks.
I can give like a really quick answer, which is that one of the most important ways you can be culturally sensitive in communication is providing information in the first language of people you want to reach. So the museum translates everything from like caution, this area has a wet floor, to, here is an exhibit about lemurs, into English and Spanish. And that's just one very basic but also very essential example that immediately broadens your audience.
Yeah, and my mind goes to, and I was trying to think about the name of the study, and I can't remember. I'll let you know, and I'll give it to the information so we can put it on the website. But there was a Sea Grant done a couple of years ago in a Louisiana coastal community where environmental scientists went in and said, here, community, here's your flood risks, sea levels rising, this should be helpful for you, and they weren't received well at all. And so they went back, learned. It seemed like a very humble approach. Sheila Jasanoff has this idea called technologies of humility, which kind of reminds me of what Dr. Hirsch was talking about earlier about social infrastructures. But they kind of built on this idea, went back and just did exactly what everyone's been saying and listened. And they changed the trajectory, or the trajectory of the project changed because they were with the community. And they gave them a lot of the same information in the end, but the way that it was received and why it was received was very different. So it happens.
I know in the Weather Service, we have basically a language services program now, and the leader actually came from our office in Key West. Her name's Crisia Negron, and they've started off, and they're actually using AI technology to help translate Weather Service products into Spanish, number one, and then I think they're also going to extend that to other languages. I think Haitian Creole is one, and I can't remember the others, but that looks very promising, and again, it's using AI in an innovative way.
I'll just say real quickly that one of the really nice requests that we received after doing some of the YouTube updates when the hurricanes were around is that we had people from Brazil and another person from India who asked if we could make our YouTube updates available in that language. And so I did a little bit of research, and you can actually take the transcript of what you have put together in the update and resubmit it, and click the boxes that you want it translated to. And so we did that, and I was in a conversation with them saying, did this work? I never have done this before. And they came back and said it's beautiful, and they wanted to learn more about why we have satellites. And they never knew, because when they hear the term satellite, they think of spy. They were thinking of, oh, the U.S. is spying on everybody because they have these satellites. Well, no, this is looking at clouds and storms and all that sort of stuff. And so it brought solace to this person, knowing that we're looking at the weather to keep people safe.
And I believe we have time for one more quick question. Does anybody have anything in their heart that they wanted to ask our panelists?
If you want to experience the YouTube channel, you can search for StormCenter, I think it's StormCenter Inc. 1, number 1 on YouTube, and then you can just watch. And if you like it, you can click subscribe. It's free.
Okay, well, seeing no questions, I wanted to end us on one final note, which is a short poem that I wrote during a coalition meeting with some of my fellows in North Carolina. It's called Joy. I feel joy, not because I'm always happy, but because I won't destroy my own chance to create change within myself, my circles, my community. May the gift of joy be a rebellious act in a world so entrenched in broadcasting misery. For me, joy is my hope. May I offer joy to you through all the hardships you feel. All the love in my heart is for the world to say, I feel joy. Thank you.